6 victims in a span of 8 weeks, and not a goddamn finger lifted. The state prosecutor refused to provide a warrant. The police lacked sufficient evidence. Our state reps stood by the assessment made by health officials. The hospital where I used to work called it a series of unrelated health incidents, and every step of the way were pharmaceutical companies with hands far down our pockets. The hatchet men. Go figure. On paper, it just looked like a complaint, like not having enough fancy soaps in the bathrooms, but it's hard to convey the sickening feeling of dread that creeps up on you when you see another victim dead on the operating table, their organs ruptured by hundreds of porcelain-white teeth. Spontaneous, internalized hyperdontia. Fancy name for teeth growing inside the body, molars blocking airways, canines rupturing stomach linings, blood clots, severed arteries. There is no end to the possible complications. And no one said a thing. I put in my 2 weeks' notice and set off on my own. There'd been an outbreak of cases up in Manitoba some years back, but I'd never seen anything like it in the Midwest. Now there was a cluster of victims in the wider Mankato area, smack dab in the south of Minnesota. I talked to 3 of the families. The victims didn't have much in common, and there was no apparent pattern. It wasn't until I talked to the 4th family that I realised what was going on. I was allowed to check out the room of a young woman who'd passed away when I found that she had a love for nature snacks, trail mix and raisins mostly, but also something locally produced. Honey roasted sunflower seeds, something she'd bought from a travelling salesman, produced right here in Tomskog, Minnesota, not sold anywhere else. After 2 weeks of living out of my car, I'd once again been on the phone with the police. They knew me by name, but were no more helpful now than they'd been the first dozen times. There wasn't anything illegal about selling roasted sunflower seeds as a side business, and they had no reason to suspect foul play. Sunflower seeds don't cause people's stomachs to fill with teeth and cut themselves to death from the inside. I couldn't argue with that, but goddammit, I tried. It took a bit more sleuthing, but I made steady progress. I could barely believe my eyes when I found it. The place had the weirdest name. I thought it was a joke at first, but the High House is most definitely a thing. High is actually the word for tooth in the Lakotan language, because of course it was. There was a large field where they could grow sunflowers at the far end of the property, and with a name like that, and various sources, I knew I was onto something. And if no one else was going to do anything about it, I'd take matters into my own hands. I refused to see another victim coughing up teeth. The High House used to be a ranch. It was repurposed back in the 90s into a sort of retreat, but the surrounding community slowly got depopulated. Nowadays, only the High House remains. Until I started looking into it, most people just assumed it was abandoned. Getting to it wasn't as simple as one might think. There are several unmarked roads that all lead into this sort of circling pattern. If you don't know what to intentionally look for, most people would just drive straight back to the highway. It took me the better part of half an hour to get to the outskirts of the property, even though I knew the roads fairly well. The entire area was protected by an 8 feet tall chain-linked fence, lined with barbed wire and warning signs. There was no doubt that intruders would, most certainly, be shot on sight. But under the cover of darkness, I still found a way inside. There are spots where animals have crawled under the fence, along the sides. It was cold outside, Minnesota weather in late September. A piercing wind cut through my jacket, and my hands were losing their colour. There'd been a mild rain earlier, leaving everything damp and chilly. I had to stop myself from slipping on fallen leaves. I'd brought a flashlight, handgun, and a phone. No identification. The clouds parted as I got closer, lighting up the central area of the property with pale moonlight. The house itself was a 70s-style wooden house, at least 15 rooms, spread across 2 floors, 2 entryways, a main one in the front, and a back door leading to a field, a tool shed on the eastern side, and a long series of guest rooms, separate from the main building. I think it used to be some kind of stables. The place was falling apart. The grass grew tall enough for me to hide in, and the road leading up to the gate was so cracked that it looked like cobblestone. The windows were boarded up, and there was no sign of any vehicles. I was having second thoughts about this place, but everything pointed me here. Still, I couldn't see much of a business. This was hardly the place for a large-scale operation. It wasn't until I rounded the side of the house that I realised I was on the right track. Right there, poking out of the soil, was a perfectly white molar tooth. Not a big one, but definitely not a pebble. No blood, no bones poking out of the ground. Just a tooth. I decided I'd go around the house to check it out from all angles. There were also the guest rooms. Someone could be staying there. I also wanted to confirm sunflowers growing in the fields, maybe take a few samples. The thought struck me that maybe this was all unintentional. Maybe they didn't know what happened to their customers. It might be some kind of irradiated soil, or a parasite. But if your customers start to die, then maybe you ought to pay more attention. But that tooth, sticking out of the ground, told me another story. It told me that they knew what they were doing. As I rounded the back of the building, the clouds grew thicker. For a moment, I could barely see anything but the outlines of the property, the sharp corners of the various houses and sheds, along with an abandoned tractor broken down in a dried mud pit. I was so focused on the main building that it took me a few seconds to realise the grass feeling different against my cold fingers. I was standing in the middle of the field. It was covered in sunflowers, mixed in with the tall grass, unkempt and untreated. They had a rough texture to them, and just touching them made seeds rattle to the ground, falling haplessly out of the floret. They were ready for harvest. I brought out my phone and started taking pictures. I forgot to take the flash off, so my phone lit up the field like a lightning strike. This was the first time that I saw that the sunflowers were a sickly blue. I grabbed one of the sunflowers and twisted the head off. I put it in a plastic bag and stuffed it into my pocket. I was about to move on when I suddenly heard a strange rustling noise. The stem of the flower that I'd just cut was shaking back and forth. Seconds later, another sunflower was shaking, and then 3 more. As heartbeats passed, they all started shaking in unison. I couldn't help but feel like they were screaming. An alarm, a warning. A thought occurred. If this was an alarm, it meant someone was listening. An alarm means nothing if there's no guard. I backed away from the field and listened. The shaking was hypnotic, going back and forth all in sync. There was no question about it. It was deliberate. Some kind of instinct or intelligence. They weren't mindlessly swaying in the wind. This was a pattern. I didn't want to overstay my welcome. There was no reason to stick around. I wasn't there to handcuff someone and put them in the back of my car. I just wanted a solid lead. The picture I took turned out fine, so I sent it to a friend of mine and told them I'd call later, just in case I lost coverage. That way the picture would be out there, no matter what. Good thing I did. As the wind picked up, I smelt an awful acidic smell, like raw oil mixed with sulphur. There was no apparent source, but I could hear something just outside the fence. A patrol. Something moving in the underbrush, coming out of the forest. A low groan echoing from one point to another, spreading like a wildfire. Flock calls. At first I thought there were 3 of them, but in seconds there were 8. A dozen. 15, maybe more. Groan after groan after groan, guttural rumbling calling out to one another. The sunflower field still shook. I had to get out of there. Fast. Crawling on my hands through the high grass, I could hear their groans rising and falling. I scratched my hands on little white teeth growing out of the ground. I knocked a few out by the root, and I swear the earth twitched like it hurt. I reached the main building. There was about 4 feet of gravel lining the edge of the foundation, so I didn't have to crawl through the grass. It barely made any noise over the wind anyway. They were by the front gate, 3 of them, congregating. I could only see their vague outlines in the dark. They were tall and had these ridiculously long arms, almost long enough for their knuckles to scrape against the ground. They kept making these strange humming noises, like someone trying to speak with their mouth closed. They'd find me out here, without a doubt. I had to hide and wait them out. I considered going back, but I heard something by the corner on the back of the house. Maybe they'd picked up on my tracks, or my scent. If I kept going forward, I'd get spotted by the 3 at the front. I could try to get over the fence, but the barbed wire wouldn't make it easy. Besides, there were plenty of them out in the woods. However, there was a slim window leading into the basement right beside me. I could hide down there until morning and slip out once they stopped looking for me. It was my best bet. All it took was a little push for the rotten frame to come loose. I moved it out of the way and slipped inside. I picked up my phone to use as a flashlight, only to see I had just over 30% battery left. I must have forgotten to charge it in the car. The floor and walls were solid concrete. There had been an attempt to cover it up with wallpaper at some point, but it had loosened and rolled up years ago. Left was just this chunky yellow texture, still sticky to the touch. Something crunched under my feet. Looking down, I saw teeth. Hundreds of them. Various shapes and sizes, milk teeth, molars, canines, some whole, some broken, some rotten, some with moving, exposed nerves. With every step I took, I could hear something snapping under my heel. I could see them growing by the base of the walls, sprouting like mushrooms. There was a big cluster in one of the corners, with one tooth the size of a thumb. A handful of them grew out of an old rotating fan in the ceiling, the weight tipping it to one side. This made staying quiet almost impossible. I looked around for a hiding spot. There was what looked like an old locker, like something from a gym. At least it was metal, and I could close the door behind me. I took a few steps forward, holding my breath, listening for something to react. At any point, I expected to hear something, a shriek, a voice, a scream, to feel a hand on my neck, a whisper in my ear. But I reached the locker. I had to pull on the door a few times as teeth loosened and fell off the door. The inside was completely covered in teeth, gathering like a hive of insects trying to stay out of the light. There was this moist smell, like a damp mouth. I just stood there, contemplating what the hell I'd stumbled into. Something moved by the stairs. I shut my phone off and stepped inside. Teeth or not, there was plenty of space. I carefully closed the door and curled up into a ball. I felt like I'd crawled into the mouth of a sleeping animal, ready to chomp down and tear me to pieces. I pulled my shirt up to breathe through the fabric, both to stay calm, but also to keep from breathing in too much. This place had to be full of bacteria and mould. My pulse was out of control, and there was something moving outside, something carefully stepping around the teeth, occasionally breaking one off with a bone-chilling snap. It was stumbling, bumping into furniture, sudden rattling as piles of teeth spilled across the floor, a hulking, drooling sniffle, like a kid trying not to cry. "Oh," it moaned. "Oh." Husks of words. A threat. I clutched my handgun tight. I'd taken the safety off 100 times at the shooting range, but this was the first time I didn't even think about it. If that thing came near me, I'd give it all I got. I closed my eyes, trying to hear something over my hammering heart. Heavy, crunching steps, little things falling off shelves, a chair tipping over, and shuffling steps, trying to recover their balance. There was a sudden quiet. My fingers were tingling, and my body screamed for air. I couldn't keep it in anymore, and gasped. The locker door burst open. I think it was a man once. Even in the dim lights of the basement, I could see his mouth was so wide it almost split his head in two, teeth covering his entire mouth and tongue, one tooth sticking out of his eye, making him unable to blink, small teeth poking out of his hair and eyebrows, a long canine blocking one of his nostrils. A hand gripped my shirt, little teeth tearing at the fabric as I was lifted out and pushed. I fell against an old sofa, breaking the armrest. I held my gun up and took aim. Pulling the trigger would mean my time was up. They'd all hear me and come running. But if it was a matter of that, or dying, I wasn't taking any chances. I didn't even know if a bullet could pierce him. The moonlight reflected off hundreds of little white spots. As it stepped forward and reached out to me, I raised my weapon. And as he moaned, I fired. I fired 3 shots, and the thing just stopped. Blood started running out of the side of its throat. A line of teeth was missing from the mouth, and there was a large hole in its neck. The 3rd shot went wide. It keeled over, still reaching for me. "Oh! Oh!" Its hand unfurled, revealing a pristine set of keys. This had been a person. I picked up the keys as blood kept pumping out. The thing on the ground kept twitching, little teeth losing their grip on it as the body died, falling off of him like wilting petals. This had been a person. The thought was alien to me, but I couldn't let it stop me. Not now. I had to go. Something blocked the basement window. A shadow. They were here. I burst into a sprint. I ran through the basement, up the stairs and through the door. An old dining room with thousands of teeth glittering like little white diamonds. A smell that could only be described as dead bacteria and death. Dozens of canvas sacks, full to the brim with sunflower seeds, ready to be shipped off for preparation. I ran straight for the front door, but turned on a heel. The handle was turning from the outside. I could hear glass breaking, groaning voices as tall beings climbed inside. There was only one way to go. Up. Up a flight of stairs, into a long corridor, lamps covered in teeth, door handles, little bumps under the carpet, frames, photos, knickknacks, all drowned in white spots and sharp edges. And the darker the hallway got, the bigger they were. I didn't look behind me. I didn't need to. They were coming up the stairs. Some of them were tall enough to climb in through the 2nd-story windows. They were surrounding me. Fast. There was a lining in the ceiling. A pull-down staircase. I pulled it with all my strength, breaking part of the ceiling as dozens of teeth rained over me. I climbed the brittle wooden stairs and coughed as pounds of dust fogged up the air. I rushed up, pulled the stairs up, and looked around. A single window, leading out into the fields. A small round window with a cross. That was all I had. I went for it. I heard them pull the staircase back down. I heard them climb it, clearing it in 2 steps. I heard their groans, and I heard them coming closer. My lungs were burning, but I had to keep going. Even if I had to jump through the window, I couldn't stop. Then I started coughing. My lungs hurt. I lost control of my leg, fell, slid over the floor, and piled teeth in front of me. I barely noticed my bleeding arms. I looked back. I'd been right the first time I saw them. They were just these shades, solid black voids, at least 8 feet tall, hunched over with long arms that dragged across the floor. It was as if they weren't even truly solid, as they seemed not to break anything in their stride. One of them pointed at me with a long, elongated finger. "Hello," it groaned. I spit up a tooth. I could feel them inside my left knee, preventing me from bending the leg. I felt them breaking through the roof of my mouth, the inside of my throat. I tasted blood, and suddenly there was a blur in my eye. I managed to get back up on my right leg and stumble forward, mere feet away from the window. Outside, the field of blue looked sort of peaceful, but the window railing, the cross, it was solid metal. I grabbed it with my hands, but it was useless. I tried breaking the glass, but a spike of pain in my arm took all my momentum. My hands clinked against the glass as tips of teeth broke through the skin of my fingers. They were moving closer. They were breaking me apart. All it took was a malicious will, and the world would find a way to appease them. They were killing me. Killing me. I can't describe the pain, every pore of my skin stretching, a million little stabs inside and out, my vision narrowing to a tiny pinpoint, solely focused on the outstretched finger. Then, a grunt. It was different from the others. The hand pointing at me lowered as the creatures gathered. One of them reverently carried the creature had shot in the basement. There was a moment of silence, where all I could hear was myself. I picked up my phone. It took me 2 tries to unlock, and I scraped the screen violently. I called a random number on my contact list and dropped it. I tried saying something, not knowing if they even answered. I tried to ask for help, to ask for someone to come here, but what came out was just this eerie sound. Help. The creatures turned their attention to me. In that moment, I understood. They weren't completely physical and needed someone to fill the sacks. They needed a farmhand, someone to toil in the field, someone to get their seeds out in the world. And if I didn't comply, they could make everything so much worse. I knew it. I saw it. I don't know if anyone heard me. Maybe no one did. Maybe no one will come looking for me, and maybe that picture I sent will be deleted. But a part of me hopes that if someone comes here, some way, someday, that they won't make the same mistake I made. I'll hold the keys tight. I hope that they'll listen and help.